Welcome everybody to today's session about e-invoicing in finance and supply chain with dox42. We are going to have a look into three different options of e-invoicing, where the first one is going to be how you embed SSRS into the e-invoicing of electronic reporting. So that's the simplest task, as you will see later on. Then the second option that we will have a look into is going to be how you create XMLs with dox42 with either the XML just as the structure, like for example for PEPL, as well as the attachment. So how can you attach the invoice to that XML directly with dox42? And the third option is going to be how you use dox42 in combination with ZUGFeRD Invoicing. So for the German standard on how you can embed the XML into the PDF directly with the new version 5 options. Okay, so let's dive right in. The first thing that we are going to look into, as mentioned, is that we will see how we can integrate already existing SSRS reports with e-invoicing with electronic reporting. And that is very much as you do it with your existing options with SSRS. So instead of using the SSRS with dox42 version 2002, it will already just replace the moment you integrate the PDF into the XML if it's SSRS with dox42. And we are doing this very much in the moment to trigger the e-invoice of electronic reporting when we send the original here. That will then include it in the electronic reporting batch jobs. And before we are having a look into the file that is going to be generated, what I'd like to show you briefly is the configuration that we are using in this case. And we have the invoice models with the sales invoices for, in this case, PEPL. And in here, in the designer, you will see that there is nothing special about it, just in the attachment section for the document reference, we will then include the dox42 report. Let's have a look into the additional document reference. And very much at the attachment section, that's then where dox42 will be applied. And this is also what we see if we look into the electronic reporting jobs. So if we look into the reporting jobs, there will be one. Just browse to the most recent one, which is finished. This is the one that I just did. And if we have a look into the files, well, it's not pretty because it's an XML, but it's an e-invoice. In this case, and if we scroll down a little further, the invoice that gets integrated here in the sales report with all the code here is going to be the PDF that we generate with dox42. Okay, so much for the first option. That is the SSRS standard dox42 embedded into the e-invoice XML. Now, the second option is that we generate dox42 XMLs directly with dox42. And that is one integration that in this environment are built already based on the new option where we have electronic reporting as a data source. And the first thing that I will need to change to be able to demonstrate this is we will switch in the print management from the SSRS reports to the electronic reporting of dox42. We do have another video where we go into more detail about how you set up electronic reporting in dox42 with data sources. In this case, it's mostly just going to be about the invoice in combination. And it works the same way that I'm going to show you now also with the SSRS. For the sake of demoing it, let's switch to the electronic reporting. And also one note here, as you can see, you can trigger from the print management both the SSRS and the electronic report configuration if they are set up correctly. Right, sales invoice is set up, the default is set up, and let's have a brief look into the invoice journal that already uses the new print destination. From the design, you will not know a big difference because we set up the very same templates just with this with a different data source in the background. This is very much what we are showing in the other video. But the big difference is we have set up an archive in this case that already triggers the XML directly and saves it into the SharePoint. And that is very much the thing that I would like to show you today. So, well, again, a nice looking invoice with all the information available. But the crucial part here is that we want to generate an XML based on the data that we have with dox42. And the way I trigger this from D365 is if we have a look into the dox42 parameters. We did see, well, those of you who haven't seen this yet, we do have now the SSRS reports and the electronic reports, but the configuration would be the same if you already have an existing SSRS, as I said. And in our case, we have an archive set up, an additional, that is triggered, and that is relying on an E-Invoice template. And in this case, it's triggered to be saved to the SharePoint. So if we have a look into the printer setup, you do see that, well, it's again, of course, the dox42. It's the SharePoint as a print medium. It has the file name that I'm using dynamic variables. I want to have, in this case, the document number is the invoice number, and I want to have a specific file format, which is XML in this case. Because of this configuration, what has already happened in the background, and this, of course, also works to other print destinations, is that if we have a look into the SharePoint, into the document section here, you will see about a minute ago, well, I did 2 archives because of the configuration here. So there's one that was already sent by email, but 2 were saved to SharePoint, where one is the standard invoice, one is the E-Invoice. And the integral part about it now is if we have a look into the template, first of all, the structure recommended to be very much the same as you're already used to. You have the invoice, you have, for example, an email body that you already use, but you also have, like we do here, an E-Invoice. We do have a sample template on our homepage that I can strongly recommend if you want to start with E-Invoices. That really showcases very much what you can do, and there's a template that provides it. That I will show you in a second, but firstly, let's have a look into the template. And this is very much, well, what we triggered to be generated. So we do have the XML. In this case, for example, if you have a PEPL standard, just copy paste the PEPL to the Word file. And then here you will be able to easily adapt anything that you'd like to change. And you just add the fields that you want into your XML. Like, for example, here we also loop for the line requirements, or if there's special VAT. It all works the same very much as you're used to with the standard invoices, but you can also output the XML. To test, of course, as always, you can generate and have the what you see is what you get experience. In this case, that the XML is then, of course, outputted into, again, the XML here. But this is very much the same output that you see here is the one that we also got when we have a look into the SharePoint and to the generated document, that it very much just took what we had, created the XML based on the dox42 template, and created, for example, also you see the repetition for the lines here, everything that is applicable to this specific XML. Good. That's the option that you have if you want to output the XML without the PDF being embedded. The next option that I'd briefly like to show you is if you want to also embed the E-Invoice, the invoice into the E-Invoice. We do have a new data source with dox42 version 5, so version 5 in the core module. And if we open this very template, both E-Invoice and the attachment E-Invoice in my case rely on the very same data map as also the invoice. But what we did additionally here is to be able to also use the PDF embedded. We have the new dox42 docchain data source. And that is what I'm using here, where you basically just specify, well, a name for the data source as always, but also the file path of the document that you additionally want to generate, which is relying on the very same data map. So we are in combination to the XML, also generating the sales invoice English, and that will then output, in this case, the data source, additional fields that I will show you in a second in the data map. Right. If we look into insert data field, the invoice docchain data source that we have just used now has additional fields. Doc will be the binary, doc base64 is going to be the output as the base64 document. And that is what I have in this case, for example, here included with the doc base64. And if I generate it, same as on the server or locally, it will generate a very large file, including the whole document as a base64 string with everything included here. Well, and as you see here, we do have the rest of the data, but this is the PDF, the invoice PDF generated and embedded into the XML code here directly. As we see, we created quite a large file, 55 pages, but including the whole string of the PDF of base64. And this standard, of course, you can again use with the standard. So if you use this document with the XML combination output in D365, it will then, of course, include also everything that you have here into the output directly, for example, into the SharePoint like I did. Or if you additionally want to use the Azure Blob Storage, works the same way. Good. I promised you that we also have a sample template for the E-Invoice. And that is one thing that I can recommend having a look into the resources here. And if we look into the invoice, like just type in the invoice here, you will see that there's a sample template for the ZUGFeRD E-Invoice, which also provides you with an option to how you do it embedded. But that is again already the last thing that we are also going to look into. How do you combine the capabilities of version 5 ZUGFeRD integration with finance and supply chain? In our integration, what we are going to use is the custom output options of dox42, and we are going to use the print destination extensions of dox42. Specifically, what this means is we firstly need to register the ZUGFeRD action of dox42 in finance and supply chain. So if we, for example, have a look into our server documentation, you see there is a new action as of version 5, which is our ZUGFeRD action, and it has, most importantly, 2 parameters. So the most important one that we also are going to use is the XML file template path. And what it does is it's going to use that XML, the path that you specify here, and embed this at the moment of generation into the PDF. And now to use this within D365, what you will need to do is firstly, of course, register this custom output action. So go to the system administration. And if you look into the custom output actions, there are all the actions that I already, in this case, used for this specific environment. And one is the ZUGFeRD action, where the ZUGFeRD action is relying on an output action that I will show you in a second. And in my case, specifically, what I'm using is that I'm using the XML file template path here, which has a parameter value linking to the E-invoice that we used multiple times. In here, now you could, of course, also use a dynamic value with, like, for example, we do here with the Azure Blob Storage. Like if we want to use variables of dox42, you can do the very same thing here. If you want to create it more generic, in my case, I've used the absolute path to be used because I'm using it in this one invoice. But this is the ZUGFeRD action specific registration. Now to generally address an output action, what you will need to do is in dox42 output actions. We do have the output actions where you generally register what output actions are available. And in here, you just need to make sure that this name of the output action here is very much the same as the technical name of the ZUGFeRD action of the dox42 server documentation. Okay, now how do we use this with the specific invoice that we want to use? What we are going to do here is, if we look into the dox42 parameters again, with the newest version, what we also applied is that you have print destination extensions that are opening and print destinations that are closing. The reason for this is because the ZUGFeRD action, more specifically, is a modify action, and modifies need to happen before the rest of the call. So the ZUGFeRD action is something that is applied as an opening print destination extension for it to be applied before generating the PDF. And that we can do if we go to electronic reporting in this case. We do have the print destination extensions as the opening ones. And this is where we are going to use now our ZUGFeRD action. This is also a new option of the new version, is you can use it specifically for just the print medium. So for example, in my case, I don't want the ZUGFeRD invoice to be generated, for example, when I do it on print or when I send it via mail. I only want it to be applicable if it's for the SharePoint. Or for example, if you have another custom option, you can select that too here. But in my case, it's just for the SharePoint. And because of this, we embed the XML into the PDF that we generate. And we have done so when we print the report the last time into the SharePoint. Let's go back to our output folder in SharePoint, where we have generated that PDF 11 minutes ago. And to be able to show you the embedded XML, which is very much the same that we have already seen in the second option. Let me just download this invoice. And we are going to open it in Acrobat Reader because we can see the embedded file here. All right, and what you already see with this icon here is that there is something embedded, which is in our case the XML that we want to open. And if we open this, it will show very much the same file that we have now used also in the second option with the XML, but in this case as an embedded option into the PDF directly. Again, with the repetition for the lines, everything that we have done there is now already part of the PDF, and it also has the full conformity. The thing that you will need to make sure is that the XML, for example, there are changes in the requirements, governmental side, then you will need to adapt those in the Word template, but then it will just work accordingly to, as we have done it now with the full integration of ZUGFeRD and dox42 in this example. Okay. So much about the three options of e-invoicing in finance and supply chain with dox42. Thank you very much for being part of the session today. And yeah, see you soon. Bye.